recorded, which is good. So that means any teachers out there, if you want to show this to multiple sections of your class, obviously we know only a certain amount of students can watch with us live, and that's A-OK. I will be sending you this recording after the program so you can watch at your convenience. And then, just to make sure everything's playing A-OK now live, follow those important setup instructions that you see underneath the image of our current special exhibit, Fighting for the Right to Fight. So first off, as you can see there, close out all open programs on your computer, especially any programs that are using internet on here. Adobe Connect is very bandwidth intensive, and so that will help out with that so things don't slow down or lag. If anything ever freezes or stalls, just kind of refresh and join in with us again. If you couldn't hear the music, or if you can't hear me, well, I'll try to speak up as loud as I can, but just kind of give us a shout, let us know if you can't hear us very well, and we'll try to adjust from there. But make sure your volume is up to the max on your computer. And I think that's pretty much it. And so, as I said, it's me, Chrissy, here. Also with us from the museum is Shelby Johnson. She will be monitoring your questions coming in. So you'll see how we'll open up the floor for questions in just 1 second, and you'll sometimes see her typing in as well. So she's kind of behind the scenes helping us out here, providing me with some of your student questions so we make sure we can ask these wonderful gentlemen as many as we possibly can. So you may be hearing her in the background. So let's actually transition, and let me show you kind of this new area that we'll be moving into. First off, if you look underneath the PowerPoint, you'll see that Q&A area. Now, different from the chat section, that will work. No one else will see the questions that you send in except for me and except for Shelby. Shelby will be recording some of those. Of course, we won't be able to answer all of them or discuss all of them today, but please type them in there at any point. We'll try to see how many we get to. Now I'm going to start my webcam so you can actually see all of us. Let's see if we can, let me fix this really quick. Uh-oh. We can only see the tops of our heads. We don't want that. Let's try that again. All right. Okay, now they can see. We can see each other, and they can see all of us. You can wave out to the world. There's thousands of students watching us right now. I know you can't tell that, but there are. I promise.
Welcome.
I'm so overjoyed and ecstatic today. I've been looking forward actually to this webinar since we knew you guys were coming here to New Orleans. So I've been kind of having a little countdown since to this really exciting event. And I know the students are looking forward to it too. I wanted to introduce you all first, and I brought up some of your old pictures you guys can see in the corner there. Next to me is Colonel Charles McGee in the red, as you can see in the middle. And on his other side, to his right, is Lieutenant Colonel George Hardy. As you can all know already, they are Tuskegee Airmen. I'm going to turn it over to your questions in just 1 second, but I thought I would just kind of give a brief overview, especially for those of you who aren't studying World War II yet, just give you a sense of why we're here and what we're talking about. So actually, to bring it before the war, in spite of adversity and limited opportunities, African Americans have played a significant role in all of U.S. military history. However, being denied military leadership roles and skilled training because many believed they lacked qualifications in combat duty. Before 1940, African Americans were barred completely from flying in the U.S. military. These men next to me and the Tuskegee Airmen that they were flying with and silenced doubters and proved their skill and expertise in the air during World War II. They are the first African-American pilots. They will tell you about flying these kind of dangerous missions all over the skies of Europe and North Africa during the war, and actually after World War II as well. So what we're going to do today is we're going to kind of break it up into 4 main sections. And I will also be, in addition to you typing in your questions, I'll be asking you all some questions too. So that actually brings me to our first poll question of the day that I'm going to bring up here. And then we'll actually be able to see how they respond. So what I didn't tell you all, though, is that the military at this time is totally and completely segregated. And I just wanted to make sure everybody knew what that definition meant before we move forward. So I'm asking you all, and I'm asking you to vote on it, what is segregation? And I'll post the results in just 1 second. So Is it, let's see here, A, unfairly treating a person or a group of people differently from other people? B, an unfavorable opinion not based on reason or knowledge? C, the action of setting someone apart from other people? Or D, an oversimplified image of a person or group? I'm going to let you all vote. I see, don't you see it changing there? People are voting, they're changing their answer. So I know this is tricky, actually. So we'll see what you guys think. I'll give it another second before I reveal.
I think I know where you're at.
All right. So I'm going to broadcast results. It looks like we're relatively evenly split. It looks like A has a little bit of a lead. But those of you who actually voted C, the action of setting someone apart, from other people, that technically is segregation. So as I told you, the military is completely segregated at this time. All right, you'll have more opportunities for polls in just 1 second. I'm going to hide this, make this go away. All right, and so, gentlemen, if you don't mind, I'd love to kind of start with you and chat about your early life, your childhood. Can you tell us first, both of you, where you grew up, and kind of our first question from students, too, is why did you then eventually decide to join the armed forces? And that's from Mrs. Taylor's class from Lawrence Middle School in Lawrenceville, New Jersey. That's a lot in the first question, but
I was born in Cleveland, Ohio, but left there in 3rd grade. Keep growing up here as Illinois and Iowa. Had parents and grandparents that go to high school, go to college, so I was in college when I entered the service. Had finished 2 years of college, but officially I got into it because I was avoiding the draft. Had a draft card, learned in ROTC how to handle a rifle. That kind of meant being on the ground, heard about aviation, passed the exams for pilot training, but after my first flight I knew I'd made the right decision because I fell in love with aviation.
Great, thank you.
I'm George Hardy. I grew up in South Philadelphia, went to school there, but when you talk about race separation, I walked to school to the west, went to an all-black school, the teachers, the principal, and all the students. But that was through the 6th grade. In the 7th grade, I walked to the east, where the school was predominantly white, predominantly Italian and Jewish. And that was 7th and 8th and 9th grade. Then I went to South Philadelphia High School, farther south from me, predominantly Italian area. And of 281 in my graduating class, only 4 were Afro-Americans. So it shows you the change in my going to school. But I graduated in June of 1942. I turned 17 that same month. But the war was going on 6 months before the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. And my brother went into service in 41. I wanted to go into service, but my father wouldn't sign the certificate to go in at 17 because I wanted to go into the Navy at that time. But he wouldn't sign, so I had to wait until 18. But in the spring of 1943, I got the chance to take the aviation cadet exam. They give it to people at 17. If you were a high school graduate, I took it and passed it. And I was sworn in as a private in the reserve, which meant when I turned 18, I didn't have to register for the draft. They reserved me for aviation cadet training at Tuskegee. And I turned 18 in June of 43, and later that month I received orders for active duty. I went to Keesler Field for basic training, then the Tuskegee College Training Detachment, and entered aviation cadet training in December 43. Graduated in September 44 and ended up going overseas in early part of 1945 and flying over the skies of Europe in a P-51 in March and April 1945. I was 19 years old then.
Wow. Thank you both. And actually, we will see that P-51 just shortly, the one that you all saw yesterday. Everybody, just to kind of fill you in and clue you in, we are actually going to be dedicating a P-51 Mustang that is very much in the likeness of the planes that both of these gentlemen flew later this evening. I'll give you all the details and I'll show you some really cool pictures of them building that plane in just 1 second. So what we're going to move to now, and I've got actually a lot of questions on this that I'll get to in just 1 second, but it's training. And before as I said, before we kind of talk a little bit more, I have one more poll question for the students, because actually I got this question for you all. A lot of people were asking me this, but I was going to turn this around and ask the students instead. A few students asked me, well, why is this group called the Tuskegee Airmen? So we're going to let them respond and see what they think. So is it A, Tuskegee was the code name for the first overseas mission? B, they trained at Tuskegee Institute in Alabama? C, many men lived near Tuskegee, Alabama, even though, as we know, these two gentlemen did not grow up there. Or D, Tuskegee was the nickname of the trainer planes they flew. All right, it looks like they know. We've got a smart group that we're talking to here, so I'm going to broadcast the results. Yes, it keeps changing. 82% of you, as I was just looking right now, are, yes, it's B, training at Tuskegee Institute. And I thought, in addition to the questions that you all will be answering, I actually have a really neat video clip that I want to show the students of some of the training in Tuskegee. So what I'm going to do actually for us here, I'm going to pause our video and audio.
Deep inside Alabama is a famous school called the Tuskegee Institute. It was founded on July 4th of 1881. And since that Independence Day, it has graduated many thousands into agriculture, into science, into industry. This school was the first of its kind, and its founder, Booker T. Washington, was a pioneer who broke open a road for others to follow. You can't make a fighter squadron out of concrete and aluminum and a can of paint. It takes men. A chemistry student, a welder, a shoe salesman must learn how to fly. A group of average Americans must become a team of fighting men with wings. There's a new world up here. A man has to learn his way around. It takes many weeks of learning to make a fighter pilot. And a lot of that learning is done in a hard wooden chair. Because a fighter pilot is a combination of a mathematician and an athlete, a scientist and a sharpshooter. He's got to know what goes on inside his plane. The heart of his fighter is steel and copper. Its bloodstream is gas and oil. But its brain is the man who flies it. Squadron after squadron out of Tuskegee, flying P-40s first, tough little planes, then striking with Thunderbolts, P-47s, then riding the Mustangs, P-51s. No, it was never easy for these men. They were pioneers, and no pioneer has it easy. They fought lies, they fought heartbreak, and they won. Now they fight the enemy on his own soil. They fought the enemy, not without loss. Out of the first class to graduate almost 3 years ago, only a handful are left alive, so that liberty might not perish from the earth. 3 years have passed since the founding of Tuskegee Airfield. 750 pilots have been trained. 50% of them have been in combat. And this is
Right, so we're going to go back live here so you can actually see us, and we'll be moving again here shortly. So you all saw a little bit about the training at Tuskegee. Now, we've gotten a lot of questions already, and one common one that Shelby keeps telling me that's popping up is how old you gentlemen are. Would you mind telling everybody how old you are? I know that's a funny question, but
Well, I think George already mentioned I was all of 22 when I went into the service, but glad to tell you as of last December 7th, I reached 96 years.
6, wow.
George?
Well, June of last year, I turned 90. So I
Wow.
have another birthday coming up this June.
Awesome. Well, as I said, isn't that amazing, everybody? And they traveled here to New Orleans, just as I said, to do this whole big day. So they're not done. That's for sure. So I want to start off with a couple more student questions that we've had typed in. The first one we're going to be talking a little bit more about your training. This comes from Madison. She attends Velma Jackson High School in Camden, Mississippi. She was asking, what obstacles and challenges did you have to go through in order to become an airman?
Well, I think one obstacle really was acceptance, because from a 1925 Army War College study, they determined that we were physically qualified to do service work, but not mentally and morally qualified to do anything technical, which eliminated us from being considered getting into flying an airplane. The opportunity came, and of course, we can talk about the results of it later.
Of course, I think the biggest thing was the racism we ran into. You know, growing up in Philadelphia, there was racism there, but not the way it was in the South. And three of us, scheduled to go to Tuskegee in 1943, had to go to Keysville first for basic training. They gave us Pullman tickets, three of us, and the rest of the car was all white. We went to Cincinnati and everything was fine. We ate in the dining car. But out of Cincinnati, the dining car, we still had a Pullman tickets. The dining car was rigidly segregated. And that's when we hit it for the first time. When we went to the dining car, most of the dining car was tables for white, but they had a heavy curtain across a few tables at the end. And all the colored people had to eat behind that curtain. And the curtain was weighted so that when you went through the curtain, it would always close, so that the white people wouldn't see the black people sitting behind the curtain. And that was our real introduction to racial segregation in the South. And that, to me, was our biggest obstacle.
Because both of you gentlemen originally came from the North, right? So was it kind of, as I said, shocking when you came down here? Yeah.
Yeah, that ride when you crossed the Mason-Dixon line and had to change your seat in the railroad car. And as George mentioned, the dining setup was a big change for me as well.
Well, the thing is, in Philadelphia, you still had racism and whatnot, but once you got into the South, it was legislated by law.
Backed by law.
And backed by law. So if you didn't comply with it, you could be arrested.
Another question we have about your time during training, what feeling did you have when you flew an aircraft for the very first time? Do you remember how that made you feel?
Well, for me, it was a real joy to be up and loop, roll, and spin, see the sky above, and come back, put your feet on the ground. Well, I put it this way, I fell in love with flying.
Right away?
Right away.
Yes, I fell in love with flying right away. Geez, I loved it. It was great. I went through pilot training, graduated, and started flying the P-40 for training, and then the P-47 combat training for overseas. It was then that I drove an automobile for the first time. Drove it one time before I went overseas. And I learned to drive overseas on Jeeps and pickup trucks over there.
Interesting. Okay, so Shelby, any more kind of about training that you feel like we want to bring up now? Or we can also, just so everybody knows too, we'll have a general kind of open Q&A after. So we'll talk about each of these individual segments. And
Can I still say something about?
Oh yes, I'm so sorry. Yes,
Tuskegee Airmen, the way
please
it was
do,
there.
Lieutenant Colonel Hardy.
After the war, when we trained at Tuskegee, but we didn't consider ourselves, we never referred to ourselves as Tuskegee Airmen. But in the 1970s, we formed as a national group, Tuskegee Airmen Incorporated.
Yeah.
And we adopted the name of the Tuskegee Airmen. I think a lot of that came from the fact that in the 1950s, a fellow named Charles Francis wrote a book. The title was The Tuskegee Airmen, The Men Who Changed the Nation. And that book, I think, was one of the main reasons why I wanted the name to be Tuskegee Airmen. And so we're Tuskegee Airmen Incorporated.
So was it something that you voted on? Was it a name? Yeah. Oh,
At the
okay. Interesting.
convention,
Yeah, we adopted it out of convention, Detroit, Washington, D.C., and L.A., and in those first 3 years established a national organization called Tuskegee Airmen Incorporated. We did change from being a military organization to education and charitable, so that our legacy could be passed on to the young people of today, and we now have 50 chapters around the country.
The organization still continues. The people running it were not at Tuskegee. They're too young for that. So the older people have passed the torch to them because we do have a scholarship fund and other things that should be maintained. And so this continuing organization of Tuskegee Airmen will carry that on.
Yeah. So we're documented Tuskegee Airmen, as they say, making us official, but we have other members of the organization.
Well, thank you. I didn't know that. See, I learn always when I do these webinars. I learn way more too, which is great. So I'm learning along with the students as well. So I actually want to kind of move on to combat, and we actually saw Wings for This Man. But before I as I said, ask you guys some more questions about combat, I actually wanted to show you all a little bit more about this P-51 that the museum has restored. So this restoration, as you can see in the kind of the top left-hand slide of the PowerPoint area there, was actually not restored here on site. It was restored at Flyboys Aero Works in California for nearly 2 years. So this particular P-51, let me actually show you a couple more pictures. So this is what it looked like in California before it was shipped over here. And here you can see now all loaded up and ready to go and make that cross-country trip from California to New Orleans. And then after that, this was, I think, maybe day 1 or day 2 of them assembling this plane inside of the building. And then the last picture I want to show everybody, this is actually a picture I took yesterday when I went over across the street with Colonel McGee and Lieutenant Colonel Hardy to see the plane for the first time. Newly restored, and it was painted in the likeness of the plane that Roscoe Brown flew, one of your good friends, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So tell me, this is my personal question, so sorry students, I'm going to ask one and that's it. Tell me how it felt when you saw that aircraft on the ground there, in the museum for the first time.
Well, to see the plane that we learned to love and the plane that gave us altitude, range, and speed capability beyond anything else prior to that really allowed us to do a creditable job was a real joy, and to see it in the colors of the 100th Squadron and know our friend with the name Bunny on it.
Yeah.
Both of us knew Roscoe Brown. Sorry he isn't here. He's not very well these days. But a real pleasure, and to know that it'll be a part of the future history of Air Force experience is really great.
So yeah, we were documenting this moment when you guys saw it for the first time.
Well, it's good to see that airplane. Just looking at the airplane, you see the red tail back there and the red spinner. That was the colors designated by 15th Air Force. But right behind the prop, there's red also. That designates the 100th Fighter Squadron. The three other squadrons had different coloring right behind the prop.
Behind the spinner.
Behind the spinner on the prop, designating there, and that designated as 99th, 301st, or 302nd. But the red right behind the spinner red is 100.
But you know, to speak of the other aircraft that we flew, all of us were trained in the P-40, and only the 99th Fighter Squadron flew the P-40 in combat, North Africa, Sicily, Italy. The other three single-engine fighter squadrons went directly to Italy, and we switched over and flew the P-39 Bel Air Cobra, doing harbor and coastal patrol out of Naples for a period. Then the group was picked to move from the tactical work to strategic, and that is escorting our bombers to prevent the heavy losses by the German Air Force. And we switched P-47 Thunderbolt for a period, and then finally the P-51 Mustang that you're seeing the picture.
Incidentally, I might mention we talk about the pilots and all of these things, but the maintenance people aren't necessarily mentioned all the time. And you realize that when the 332nd went overseas, they were flying P-39. That was an airplane with the engine behind the pilot. And they flew that up until the spring of 44. Then they switched the P-47, which is a single-engine plane, heavy airplane. They flew that in combat for only a month. And then in July, they switched to the P-51. It meant that the maintenance people had to work from the 39 to the 47 to the 51. So they had to adjust to maintain those three different types of airplanes.
That's difficult.
Hey, Chrissy.
Yeah.
Before we move on, we have a really good question from Lee Woodward. And Lee would like to know why there are swastikas on the plane.
Oh, very good. Lee would like to know, I don't know if everybody heard what Shelby said, why, we can see there's a couple swastikas on Roscoe Brown's plane. Why was that?
That means that he had two victories against the German fighters that we were, and our main purpose was to prevent those fighters from destroying a bomber and not allowing the bombers to do their mission, because, you know, every bomber lost, that was 10 American lives. And that was our purpose, is save American lives and allow the bombers to do their job. He had two victories. I was fortunate enough to have one victory, so I don't know whether I ever got it painted on the aircraft, but the swastika meant that he shot down two. And he was there, in fact, George mentioned that because I had come home before that mission to Berlin where Roscoe scored his time that he scored his victories. You could
He was on a mission to Berlin, which was the longest mission, the 15th Air Force. The 332nd shot down three of the German 262 jet airplanes. They were much faster than we were, but our planes were more maneuverable, and our pilots were able to double back and get on their tail and shoot them down, three of them.
Pretty amazing. Those German jets, could they fly, what was it, 100 miles per hour faster or something like that in the P-51, but you were able to
Well, you know, the jet was new at that time. Somebody said, oh, there's some out there going pretty fast and smoking from behind. But they were the first jets introduced into combat.
Right. Now, again, I don't know if I have the statistic right. You all can correct me. The Tuskegee Airmen flew over 15,000 sorties, 1,500 missions, destroying more than 260 enemy aircraft. I found that, I think, stat on the website. So
yeah, that's the history of the 99 flying and say out of North Africa, Sicily, into Italy, and joining the 332nd. And actually, our total work, though, even when we weren't escorting bombers, we had fighter sweeps destroying the chemical and the oil factories. We destroyed as many German aircraft on the ground on fighter sweeps as we did in the air. So it was key is destroying Germany's war-making potential is what it was all about.
all right, I'm going to turn it to the students now. And I've got a lot of great questions here. The first one comes from Anaya, who goes to Westdale Middle School, which is just, down the road in Baton Rouge. She wants to know, can you describe what the conditions were like when you're flying in that plane during, air combat? So that might be a tough thing to do, but...
Well, it's a good question in a way to know that the young people need. Technology has changed that picture. We didn't have the type of pressurizations and power of engines and so on. So it was, I'd say, rather rustic, but we had to wear clothing that kept us warm at that high altitude where the temperatures are quite cold. We had to be prepared to wear oxygen above, breathe oxygen as we went to altitude. It was quite different. Technology has really advanced in a way that the young people need to be aware of where it's taken us today over the early piston engine drivers and as we moved into the jet age.
Of course, I often feel funny when I look at these pictures of people flying in airplanes like the P-51 over Europe, whatnot. You see them with the oxygen mask hanging down. That couldn't be because, one, you needed oxygen at altitude. Second, your mic was in your oxygen mask. So, and you just pushed the button on your throttle to talk. If you didn't have your mask fast on, you'd have to put it up before you could talk. So, Hollywood can have people flying around with their mask hanging down, but in actual fact, once you took off, it stayed on.
Yeah, the other was that you didn't talk because that would be, it was the leader did the talking, everybody else had to keep quiet or you were in trouble.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. I was a second lieutenant, knew about that. I didn't talk at all. I just listened.
We'll talk about, I saw a couple questions pass by about what you think of the Hollywood take on some of the things you've done. Maybe we'll open up the floor to that a little bit later. Want to ask another question. Actually, this is from Velma Jackson High School in Mississippi again. But they were wondering, I thought this was a good one. How did the war affect your lives physically, mentally, emotionally, throughout the course of the war? I'm sure your emotions changed throughout this thing,
Well, looking back on it, the country really was coming out of 10 years of depression, and when America decided to help our allies in Europe against Hitlerism and later against the Japanese, the whole country was really behind the effort. The jobs that became available in the war build up, and then, of course, being drafted or entering the service to participate in helping win the war, there was a kind of different atmosphere at that time over what we did in World War II.
Yeah, that's the thing I would say is World War II brought people together. Because, over 16 million people went into the service during that period. And back home, people worked too. Medal drives, things like that, blood drives, supporting the troops overseas. Taxes were high, people gladly paid their taxes, everything to support the troops overseas. And particularly the troops in the field came from all levels of society, from the poor to the wealthy. The Hollywood actors and whatnot, and actresses, everybody, so many people were in the service. The country really worked together during the war.
And I'm sure they've seen the Rosie the Riveter posters. Everybody was involved. It turns out, and although we were able to get into aviation in a segregated way, women were used for a couple of years and then sent home, had to pay their way home. In fact, the Women Air Force Service pilots, which was an all-white group, but they weren't officially recognized. Their service wasn't officially recognized until 1976.
And I think that was a period when women really entered the workforce, because so many men went away. Women were riveters, anything you name, they did during the war to support the war effort.
And I think that's one of the biggest lessons we teach about World War II is this idea of teamwork and togetherness, here in the country, and how it did bond people together, in those different activities. Now, you've probably, I'm thinking, answered a question like this a lot, and I'm thinking we're getting this question multiple times in the Q&A. How did you deal with were you scared while flying in a plane, scared in combat ever, or you couldn't be scared, you just had to focus on your mission?
Well, that's the way I put it. If you were scared, you're in the wrong business. But training prepared us for the task that we had to do and what we might face. And yes, there were some occasions where they called it combat fatigue and maybe had to take somebody out of the active flying. But by and large, as I say, training prepared us for the many variations that we might face, and training was good. They didn't change the standard for us, and we were able to meet it and perform successfully.
Well, I would say that during the war, although we were a segregated unit, most of our instructors at basic and advanced and preparing for overseas, most of them were white pilots. But they really, I thought, did a good job of training us, where everything was almost second nature to you. And you get overseas, I don't remember ever being scared, but that's the reason they want people 18, 19 years old, to go in and they can just react, to the situation and not let fear take over.
Yeah, with the training received.
So the next question, this one was kind of interesting, and I thought, from Shania from Island Middle School in Louisville, Mississippi. She was asking, did you have to pay? So I'm sure your planes got damaged in all the different missions. Do you have to pay for that? She was wondering.
Well, unfortunately, we had the government that provided the facilities, but somebody was paying taxes, so yes, it was paid for certainly. But the war built up, and of course, left when the war was over, a lot of surplus equipment around the world, practically. But that's an interesting question, and one that affects how we operate and perform even today.
Yeah, well, the pilots of people flying didn't have to pay for anything. If their plane was damaged in combat, they just brought it back, and a crew chief then took care of everything. So no
Sometimes
problem
they
with
could
that.
fix it and get it back
Yeah.
into service, or sometimes it had
Not
to be
so
pushed
much, right?
into the boneyard.
Do you have any sense of how many planes? Do you know all the planes that you flew during the course of the war? Can you? I mean, not including training. So, like, did you have a new plane every time, or did you have your plane, like Bunny, for example? Like, Bunny was your plane, that kind of thing.
Pretty much in the unit, we were assigned a plane and had a crew chief. But sometimes if the aircraft's out for certain maintenance, because after certain hours it had to be inspected or so on. In some cases, some minor damage, maybe from flak and aircraft gun fire, there was damage to the aircraft. So you would fly whatever was available based on the number of missions the squadron was asked to perform on a particular day and time.
Well, a lot of people have the idea that every fighter pilot has his own plane with his name on it, but that's not true. The squadron has a number more pilots than airplanes, and I came in as a new guy and I had no airplane. The airplanes belong to the people who are senior in the squadron, and when they flew, that plane went by their name. Myself, I had no airplane. When I flew, I took what was left over. So one day I'll fly a C model, the next day a D model. It wasn't toward the end when I was able to fly one plane for most of my missions. But that plane still belonged to a senior pilot there who wasn't flying anymore. But as long as he was in the squadron, that was his airplane.
Chrissy, you have another question.
Oh yeah.
I was
Finish it
going to
up,
say
yeah.
for the youngsters to understand, it was a squadron back at that time was 32 pilots, 24 aircraft, and then a couple hundred technicians, the mechanics, airframe, engine, all that kept the plane flying, and then the other support, medical, communications, and so on, maybe another couple hundred people. So that's what a squadron back then. A little different now when technology has taken us.
All right, Shelley, what's the next question?
Mr. Parker's ties class would like to know approximately how many hours did you fly each day?
That's a good question. Okay. Ooh, do you know that? Okay, I'll repeat that for everybody just in case if our mic isn't strong enough. Mr. Parker's class wants to know how many hours you flew per day, if you can answer that.
Well, for me, the missions varied on your assignment in escorting the bomber group, where their target was. My average missions was probably 4 hours and 15 minutes. The longest I ever flew a mission, 6 hours. Had a few under that where they were close in. They'll say we were flying from the Adriatic side of Italy, but all the way east, Ploesti oil fields, as we mentioned earlier, late in the war, all the way north to Berlin, and also northwest from where we were, southern France. In other words, during the Normandy landing, we attacked units in southern France to keep them from backing up the German units facing the Normandy landing. But average, mine was about 4 hours and 15 minutes. Yours, George?
Well, that varied. When I got over there, I was with the Strategic Air Force, 15th Air Force, and you'd fly normally one mission a day with the bombers that flew one mission a day. But the 99th, when it first went over, was supporting tactical units, the troops on the ground. And sometimes their pilots would fly more than one mission a day, as needed, say. But once you got to strategic air escorting bombers, the bombers would usually fly one mission a day, and that's it. So, in 15th Air Force, 332nd, we normally flew one mission a day.
And then maybe the last one for this particular section will come from, this is Miss Williams' class in Jennings High School in Jennings, Louisiana. How did you both feel being a black man fighting for a country that was oppressive to your race? I mean, is that something you thought about while you were overseas?
Well, I never thought it not being my country, and the country had declared war, and we were behind supporting what was taking place, so I never looked at it as being otherwise.
No, I didn't either. Growing up in school, I learned about American history, and I loved this country. It was my country. And so I'm flying for my country. And it never bothered me about this thing of segregation. As far as flying and going to war, it's for my country too.
I think the other side of that, I often talk about what's your attitude. Mine was you treat other people like you want to be treated. You had that type of respect, and it paid off as far as I was concerned in accomplishing. And I couldn't have written a script for better opportunities I had serving our country, as George and I have both, not only in World War II, but in Korea and Vietnam.
All right, we're gonna kind of move forward a little bit and talk about coming home. Of course, your future career too, and then kind of the legacy of everything that you gentlemen have achieved. Now, I've got a lot of questions for this section, so bear with me here. The first one, students want to know, what kind of welcome did you receive when returning home from the war? Is that maybe a complicated one too? Yeah.
That's complicated. So maybe the word welcome.
Yeah, was not the right word, right?
Yeah. Even though we had dispelled the biases and so on that had been part of the policy of separating us, we were still segregated when we came home. Although they had a rest camp, I came home November of '44. They gave us a week of rest from combat, and that mine was in a hotel in Atlantic City, and they said that was the first time a black was sleeping in the room, not in the room to make up the bed.
Wow.
And so on. So there were many aspects that part of our society living hadn't changed, and so we're still segregated. You couldn't go into any restaurant you want and get food, or a room at a hotel. So it took some time, although our experience dispelled the bias and generalizations that had been part of that policy. It took some time and some action by the Air Force well after the war, when they separated from the ground forces, to realize that integration was essential to a good unit, using people based on the training and experience and where needed, not the color of their skin and that type of thing. So what we accomplished, although it took a few years for change to take place, was still important.
Yeah, well, I came back from overseas in August 1945. The 99th really was deactivated over there and reactivated here as part of the 477 composite group under Colonel Davis. But I came back in '45, went to Tuskegee, and everything was the same outside. Segregation was still in full force. But I was at Tuskegee till it closed in '46, then went to Lockburn for a few months. Then I was released from active duty in November of '46. Went to NYU, School of Engineering in '47, got married that same month. Anyway, I returned to active duty in June 1948. In April of '48, the Chief of Staff of the Air Force. The Air Force was created in September 1947. 7 months later, in April '48, the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, General Carl Spaatz, announced that the Air Force, in the interests of economy and efficiency, was going to do away with racial segregation. That was publicly announced. And 4 months later, President Truman issued his executive order saying, in essence, the Army, Navy, and Air Force will submit their plans for racial integration. And that's when it started, racial integration. And fortunately, I went to school at Keister Field in September 1948. And the plans for racial integration weren't turned into the Department of Defense until January 1949. But at Keister in '47, those of us there from Tuskegee, the black people going to school there, and actually were integrated, because we were, for the first time, in September '48, Don Simmons from Chicago, he's brown skin, whatnot, he's the first one from Lockburn. They had Keister had never had any black officers there, so they didn't have a separate BOQ for them. So Don Simmons was put in a BOQ with all whites. World War II barracks, common restroom facilities. I came a few weeks later, and I was in that barracks too. And when we flew, I would fly B-25, that's where we had to fly. And 90-some% of the time, I was the pilot, and everyone else, the co-pilot, everyone else, was white. And that started in September 1948, and that was at Keystone. And I graduated in 49, but the Air Force, I guess their plan to integration was approved in May of 49. And by end of June, the Air Force was ready, moved. They deactivated the 332nd Fighter Group, and within a very short period of time, everyone at Lockburn received orders, hundreds of people, to white units all around the world. So the Air Force was the first service to really racially integrate. The Army's plan was disapproved in 49. They resubmitted in 1950, and they started integrating about the time of the Korean War.
Korean time.
Now, Keesler, for some folks that aren't from this general area of Louisiana and Mississippi, is in Biloxi or near Biloxi, Mississippi. So was integrated on base. When you left base, though, there was still, Jim Crow was still in full effect, right?
In 1948, they didn't say they integrated, because segregation was still part of the land, part of the law. But what they did was they just didn't create separate barracks for colored officers because they didn't have any prior to that time, say. They just quietly put us into white BOQ. And we could go to the club, and we flew as pilot with a co-pilot, everybody else on the plane, white. And we did that, but quietly. They didn't announce it to anybody.
It wasn't
We just did it.
publicized.
Yeah, right. Now, you said, you didn't think about being treated necessarily as second-class citizens when you were overseas fighting in the war, but when you returned home, another question, actually, there's two schools that ask this kind of same question. How did you feel when you came back from the war and, you saw kind of the same sort of segregation here in our country? Did you feel like you needed to act or do something to change that?
Well, I personally still felt that you always do your best in whatever you're doing and still treat others like you want to be treated. My first integrated assignment was in Salina, Kansas. I got along fine on base in my work, but I never got my family to Salina, Kansas, because the community just hadn't changed that much. Their attitudes were still not up to where the service was focused and taking us, but fortunately that base, because of drawdown on the World War II buildup, it was closed, and I went out to California. But even there, things were fine on base. Off base was still a problem of housing and so on. So you might say that although we had performed well and dispelled some of the attitudes, it still took some of the civil rights action later in the early 60s to continue that direction that equality and opportunity shouldn't come from happenstance of birth, but based on education, experience, and your performance.
Well, you can go several ways on this. I got out of the service in 46, and my primary means was to catch up. I had to get an education. I wanted to be an engineer. I got married, worry about the family, and these are priority items. You worry about that more than anything else. And so that's what you follow. I had to have an education. But I went back into the service, and I got my education in the service. I got a BS in Electrical Engineering at Institute of Technology, and later they called me back to go to graduate school, so I received a master's in the service. So I got my education in the service. So it's one of those things. I had goals that I wanted to meet, and that was it. I achieved those goals.
Yeah, again, it's attitudes, because for a number of years after the Air Force integrated, we got assignments overseas that we were still not getting here in the States. I commanded a unit in the 50s in the Philippines for a couple of years. Wouldn't get that kind of assignment back here at home. Same way, even commanded a unit later in Vietnam. We mentioned they closed Lockburn Air Base, which was a wing base operation with Colonel Davis as our commander, then the commander of the wing. I became wing commander of Richards Gebaur Air Base in June of '72, and they really, here in the States over those period of years from 49 to '72, things changed very rapidly after that as attitudes changed and things became open throughout the service opportunities. But again, we experienced that slow build-up, slow change of attitude to realize that it's your, as I said, your education, your potential and abilities that should speak for you and not happenstance of birth.
Thank you. Those are just such wonderful answers. I kind of want to, we only have about, looks like 10 minutes or so left. I just would like you both to kind of briefly talk about the rest of your career, especially in the military, flying in Korea and Vietnam, and tell them about that. I know we're obviously focused on World War II, but a little bit on the rest, yeah.
Well, for me, although still I enjoyed flying, had great opportunities and actively flew 27 of my 30 years, but the flying in World War II, we declared war and provided the wherewithal to win the war. Unfortunately, Korea and Vietnam were using military power for political purposes, and in politics you really don't win because politics is a compromise. So there was a lot of unhappiness against service people after the Vietnam time frame, and some of that's going on today and what's going on. But again, service for our country, to have a strong military to preserve the freedoms that we enjoy and have here in America that don't exist in so many countries around the world, is what's important.
Now, let's see, Shelby, do we want to open it up? Do we have lots of questions? I have a couple more. You have a lot of questions?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's, while you're kind of handing over the questions, and because the kind of final thing I really want to talk about, but I'm going to have the students answer it first before you do. If you don't mind, I'm going to bring in one more poll question for students. And that poll question says, what do you think, students, is the most important legacy of these gentlemen of the Tuskegee Airmen? And then I'm going to have you guys take your turn and kind of tell us like the one thing you would love to share with students about your service and what it means to our country today. While Shelby gives us a bunch of your questions as we try to kind of answer them. But I'm going to give students your opportunity first to answer, and then I'll pose that question to you. So we'll give them a second to think. So students are saying, they're answering, so we've got a couple coming in, the integration of all races into the armed forces, helping to fight racial stereotypes, desegregation of the military. You gentlemen called attention to the inaccuracies and prevailing racism. Wow. Fought for freedom for our country. All about having, to overcome obstacles and achieve your goals. So that's what students, oh my goodness, this is awesome. I'll share all of these responses with you in 1 second, and then actually I'm going to turn it to you before I ask a few more of these questions. But what would you say, what do you want to leave, with students? What's the legacy of some of your achievements?
Well, I'd like to leave the value lessons that sustained us as just important for them. But perceive, dream your dreams, find your talents, prepare, get a good education, both read, write, and speak well, but develop your talents. Perform, let excellence be your goal, and always doing your best, and persevere. Don't let circumstance be an excuse for not achieving. We could have gone off in the corner with our head bowed and said, they don't like me, don't want me, I'm not going to do anything for them. That's not America.
Well, in the service, I learned when you're given an assignment, find out what the assignment is and do the best you can on that assignment. Each time I was given an assignment, I did what I felt was a damn good job, and it was recognized over the years. The main thing is you apply yourself, learn what you're supposed to do, and make sure you do it to the best of your ability. And you get ahead, and that's all anyone can expect from anyone in service. But the thing is, don't just take no for an answer in something if you feel you want to know something or do something, because quite often you can work around it or still move ahead. So be persistent in your goal, what you want to do.
All right, That's awesome. Now we have about 5 more minutes, so do you mind if I sneak in a couple more questions?
Good.
Okay, so from the Journey Homeschooled, I told you you were talking about like the Hollywood depictions of. There's been a few movies about. There's Red Tails that just recently came out, and Tuskegee Airmen. How do you feel about your portrayal in Hollywood?
Well, Hollywood takes a license with any
Yeah.
factor. As George mentioned earlier, in the air you've got your oxygen mask off and you're talking. Radio silence was important in the combat zone. So they put in things that they hope will get folks in the theater and so on, and it distorts true history. The young folks like what they see in football and basketball now. Everybody get in a circle and get themselves hyped up to go win the game. Well, we didn't have to hype ourselves up. We spent time with the mechanic and getting in the airplane and ensure it all was well to carry out the mission. But that's Hollywood.
Right.
George Lucas also did Double Victory, which is a documentary. And if you can see that, then you can compare and understand the difference in Red Tails.
Well, when I look at Red Tails, first of all, the love story. This pilot flying over this town with his mask hanging down to start with, and he sees a girl waving from a roof. Then he lands somewhere many miles away, gets a Jeep and drives right up to the house. We didn't have GPS then. And I wonder how he was able to do that. And then the story about the senior pilot who had a drinking problem. I don't think that could have gotten away under Colonel Davis without him finding out about it and doing something about it.
He would have been out of the picture.
He would have been out of the picture a long time ago. Colonel Davis was, I'd say, a hell of a commander. And
Right man for the right job at the right
you're
time.
right. Right man for the right job. And something like that couldn't have happened under him, I don't think. But that's Hollywood.
Yeah, that's Hollywood. Now, Naomi from Alaska wants to know, what do the medals on your jackets mean? They're looking at both of your jackets and want to know a little more.
Well, we received, they call them service medals for where you served and the period of time that you served. And then some of the others, such as Distinguished Flying Cross, the Bronze Star, and the Air Medal, are for our individual performance in the assignments that we were given.
And then Derek from Gulfport High School wanted to know, when was the last time both of you actually piloted a plane?
Well, I'm sorry, the Commemorative Air Force has a Red Tail P-51 flying, and I'm saying that I was glad, well, it'll be 3 years back now to get a ride. It's a two-place job, but has a stick in the back and do a roll over the lake up at the Oshkosh Air Show. And then a year later, one of the Commemorative Air Force units in Centola, Virginia, has refurbished a BT-13, our basic trainer, and I got a chance to go up and fly that. So still a thrill. All I can say now, my flying days are probably over, but if you got a seat open, I'm ready.
Yeah, that's right. I like it.
Well, I flew the 51 in World War II and B-29s in the Korean War. But the last time I actually flew an airplane was in Vietnam, flying a gunship. It was a combination. It had been a troop carrier airplane earlier, but they made a gunship out of it, AC-119K. Had twin engines on it, but it was so heavy, they had to put 2 jet engines on it also, so we had 4 engines on it. And that's why I flew in Vietnam at night looking for trucks, taking supplies from North Vietnam down through Laos and Cambodia, down to South Vietnam. That was the last time I flew, and that was 1971.
All right, and let's maybe close out. We've got a minute left, but I feel like we've kind of discussed this, but I feel like it's an important one to bring home again. Again, another one from Gulfport High School. They want to know, how do you feel you paved the way for civil rights in our country? That's a hard one to answer in a minute, right?
Well, looking at the record, we had a creditable record in any phase that you want to look at and compare, equal to, in some cases, exceeding the performance of other squadrons during the like work. So all is well that ends well, and it ended well.
And that's the way I look at it. World War II was really segregated. And one of the things of World War II, you never have a person of color over a Caucasian. That was a thing of World War II. In Korean War, I was flying with a white group. At one time, I was the only person of color in the 28th Bomb Squadron, flying B-29s. But then in Vietnam, I was Lieutenant Colonel, and I was 45 then, but I was a commander of the detachment, and all the pilots and navigators under me were white, about 20 years younger, but they were all white. So during my lifetime, I've seen that change, which is very comforting to me.
My experience is very similar, commanding a unit in the Philippines for a couple of years, commanding 16th TAC Recon Squadron in my year at Vietnam. Again, performance and ability based on the training and experience, we were able to, well, I guess I can say represent our country well, and that's a change. And as I say, the value lessons that sustained us are good for you young folks today. Just realize where technology is taking us into a new era, and each of you are America's future.
Incidentally, I mentioned Tuskegee Airmen, we have an annual convention, which we go to. But the people in Vietnam, although they were much younger than me, we have an annual reunion also. It's in October, and I'll be with them at Fort Walton Beach, Florida.
Well, that's great. Well, I think on that note, and with it being 1:01 Central Time, we did it all. We got it done. I want to say thank you to both of you, Colonel McGee and Lieutenant Colonel Hardy, for being with us today here at the museum, not only talking to students, but of course talking later to a big crowd here at the museum. If any of you are in the New Orleans region, we're going to have them here today for the P-51 dedication in our U.S. Freedom Pavilion. I'll show a little bit more details on that for a second. But let's wave to everybody out there because we're going to transition over and they won't see us.
Thanks for the opportunity to share with you.
Thank you so much.
Let me, so we're going to kind of transition to kind of close this out. You all will see, I think, hopefully, a rotating slideshow of our next programming. So let me actually start off, not there. Let me go back here. Let's see. So here is the presentation this evening. Again, Colonel McGee and Lieutenant Colonel Hardy will be joining us here at the museum. And actually, the neat thing is, whether you're here or you're not, that's A-okay because you can watch it. Because in a similar way, we'll be live streaming. So it won't be in this webinar platform, but we'll be live streaming it. You can just watch it right from your computer via that link. In addition to that, if you want more resources on this topic, please check out our website for our current special exhibit, Fighting for the Right to Fight, African American Experiences in World War II. If you're in the New Orleans area, again, it's up for about another month or so, till May 30th, but all the exhibit materials, or many of them, are available online, including teachers' lesson plans. And you can see some of those lesson plans and additional websites on the left-hand side for you to access. And then the last thing I'll say before I sign off is that we actually have one more student webinar this school year. And in May, please join Ella Weisberger, Holocaust survivor, and I as we talk about her experiences. She'll be in town for the children's opera Brundabar, which will be here actually, and we'll be staging it at the museum. She'll take a little time away from her